So our third panel of the day is entitled Industrial Base Modernization. The Army is in the first phase of an approved Army Industrial Base 15-year modernization implementation plan. This panel will discuss how the Army partners with industry to link capability gaps to the commercial sector to facilitate the OIB's modernization efforts. Ms. Lindsey Berckman, U.S. Aerospace and Defense Leader, Principal for Deloitte Consulting, will help direct this discussion. Did I get that right? Lindsey has more than 17 years of experience serving the intersection of production, operations, and technology. She has served multiple OEM and Tier 1 suppliers at the heart of their production activities, including key traditional commercial, defense, space, and maritime programs. She plays a key role in serving RTX, supporting ops transformation across engineering, supply chain, shop floor, and aftermarket domains across each of these three business units. Ms. Berckman also is a forefront of emerging technology and trends to advance A&D operations. She is a leader in our smart factory business, where she helped our clients shape their Industry 4.0 transformation roadmap designed to transform legacy manufacturing processes through digital technologies and AI. Ms. Berckman earned her Bachelor's of Science degree in Engineering and Systems Engineering from the University of Pennsylvania. Please join me in a round of applause for Lindsey.
Thank you so much, General Smith, and thank you to AUSA and General Brown here for bringing us together today for this excellent dialogue. We're very much looking forward to this conversation, and I'm joined here by some esteemed guests that I'll introduce here in just one moment. And really what our conversation is going to focus on is how we think about the industry to agency partnership and the collaboration that we need to really bring the OIB to life and really handle that modernization. So we're looking forward to that today. Here sitting next to me, I've got, like I said, three esteemed guests. We'll start with Brigadier General Ronnie Anderson. He is the Commanding General of the Joint Munitions Command, taking that position in the summer of 2023 and having a storied career of many other functions across multiple levels there prior, including serving as the Executive Officer to the Executive Deputy for the Commanding General of the U.S. Army Materiel Command. Next to him, we've got Mr. Rich Martin. He's the Director of Supply Chain Management for the Army Materiel Command. He has many stories and, again, a storied career prior to that, but what he is in charge of now is truly integrating and coordinating the execution of all functions and activities around the areas of supply chain management, depot and arsenal management, the organic industrial base, and enterprise logistics systems management. And then finally, last but not least, we've got Dr. Alexis Ross that's sitting here. She is joining us as the president from Apex Defense Strategies, a strategic advisory firm that guides companies in how to navigate the defense market, particularly around procurement and other top topics. She brings 2 decades of experience in both the public and private sector. So thank you to each of you today, and then I'll quickly pass it to each one of you to add any other items to your bio that you would like to bring to this audience. I know most of you probably know them in the room. And then to get us started here, I'd just like to hear from each of you in terms of what is your stake in the organic industrial base and the modernization topic that we're about to get into.
Well, thank you. Thank you to AUSA and all of the teammates, uniformed and otherwise, in the room and our industry partners. I'll start with, we are in our 250th year of the United States Army. And in November of 1775, Colonel Henry Knox made the first Army depot arsenal at Carlisle, Pennsylvania, right? So 250 years of Army depot arsenal. And in August 4th of 1775, Colonel Washington wrote a note to Governor Cook of Rhode Island and said, "Our necessities in the articles of powder and lead are of such great importance as to require an immediate supply, So ammo shortages are not a new problem. And no quantity, however small, is beneath notice. So, we have a great foundation to stand upon. I'm proud to be here to represent nearly 13,000 soldiers, civilians, and contractors that work in Joint Munitions Command across 17 locations in 12 states in the United States of America. We operate at 17 of the 23 organic industrial base locations. We have 4 missions. We do more than 155, contrary to popular belief. So we produce, store, distribute, and demill conventional munitions on behalf of the entire Joint Force and other agencies that use DoD munitions. So we do have quite a large portfolio. I know we talked about kind of the nuance. Today's hot topic was largely focused on organic industrial base. And I can tell by a lot of questions I've had so far that it's worth explaining. There is a difference between OIB and DIB. Joint Munitions Command, I am squarely in the OIB and the 15-year modernization plan. So organic industrial base, think McAllister Army Ammunition Plant, where we make everything from 200 to 5,000 pound bombs with government employees on a government facility. The government-owned contractor operated, you've heard Radford, you've heard Holston, you've probably heard a lot about Scranton these days and Iowa. If you've seen what's going on with Next Gen Squad Weapon, Lake City. Right, so those are government-owned, contractor-operated facilities, and those GOGOs and GOCOs, those are part of the organic industrial base, as opposed to the entire defense industrial base, which would include all of our commercial facilities and commercial partners who sell to the Department of Defense. I'll just one more thing, Rich, and I'll hand it over to you. Just a couple of numbers for how we've started off the organic industrial base modernization implementation. So we have 4 key projects in the first phase: the Next Gen Squad Weapon facility at Lake City, the new nitrocellulose facility that's been working for several years there at Radford, the new artillery complex at Iowa Army Ammunition Plant, so where we will have additional capacity, not just new, but additional capacity. And then McAllister with their own Army civilian personnel built the multi-purpose load facility at McAllister. So 2023, we had 24 projects totaling $1.1 billion. In 24, we had 62 projects totaling $979 million. And in 2025, we're projected to have 35 projects totaling $821 million. So it has been a significant lift. It's been largely supported by many of you in this room and members of Congress across the river. So it's been an incredible honor to get to lead the organization, dig through some of the supply chain challenges that we've had, and work with our industry partners to improve those. Thanks.
As is the story of most of my career, following behind Ronnie Anderson is never easy. I don't have a dead guy quote or a history lesson. I'm the product of the North Carolina school system. I was a career Army aviation officer and a happenstance logistician. So, General Brown, I do find it hilarious that the infantry is asking about navigation skills. But that being the case, I'm honored to represent a small but mighty directorate on the Army staff, or the Army Material Command staff, the Supply Chain Management Directorate. The question of what's my role with the organic industrial base, specifically the modernization plan. Prior to hanging up the uniform, I was honored to serve as the deputy for the OIB Modernization Task Force with Ms. Marion Wicker to roll out the 15-year modernization implementation plan then under General Daley. And then more honored to have the opportunity to lead and direct that team for a short period of time both in uniform and in civilian clothes, and then ultimately until I got appointed to the supply chain manager director as an SES. I'm joined in the crowd with Ms. Stephanie Hoagland, who now runs the OIB modernization team far more capably than I did. But my role in it was, we helped develop, draft, write, roll out that modernization plan in a fairly short period of time, but culminated in a plan that is almost arguably a generational investment into the organic industrial base. In FY23 alone, we put $2.5 billion into some modernization efforts. 106 billion of that was base funds, which is the largest investment increase in the organic industrial base investment for in quite some time. We used 1.2 billion in supplemental funds from the Ukraine effort, and another 200 million from an omnibus to modernize ammunition plants and facilities, mostly with the GO-COs. We have our own working capital fund, capital investment program that we've helped invest into the OIB, and then over the last FY24. Another 307 million in OMA base funds, and I could go on. And the whole point is and we'll talk more about it, is how are we building the capacity at the right levels to the right level of modernization to be able to sustain in 3 strategic imperatives. First and foremost is facilitize and modernize to support our signature modernization weapons programs as they and when they come online. Secondly, to continue to sustain the enduring weapon systems that we're going to continue to have for a while. As Ms. Miranda said, we tend to have great plans to sunset, cascade, divest of, that ultimately don't necessarily materialize as we once believed. And we end up having to sustain some of those weapon systems longer. And so that's the role of the organic industrial base, is to be able to surge in a time of conflict or crisis. And that's what we're trying to do. And that third strategic imperative of the OIB modernization plan is to divest of those legacy systems and processes that we no longer need. In some cases, the way that we do MRO and manufacturing, and there are two very different things within the organic industrial base, with our 3 arsenals that truly do manufacturing, with the 6 hard iron depots that do maintenance, repair, and overhaul. In some cases, we're doing it the same way we've always done it since about 1947. And so we're trying to make that large leap to be able to sustain and maintain future weapon systems, composites, advanced manufacturing techniques that you heard General Mohan talk about today, and I believe General Layler will talk a little bit more about. We're happy to describe where that fits in the modernization later. But we also can't forget that some of the things that we've been doing for a while are actually pretty good. Some of the forgings and castings machines that we're still operating at Rock Island Arsenal have been around since we put them in place, and they still operate pretty well. Trick is that in some point, they're not going to be able to do some of the materials that we may need them to do. So we do have to selectively modernize to the right level without gold plating it to an affordable and sustainable level that we don't have to go through this existential crisis to modernize it again in the future. So I'll pause there again. Sorry for no history. I apologize. Go Tar Heels. All right. And I'll turn that over to I'll yield the mic. Thanks.
All right, thanks. Thank you again, Lindsey and AUSA. Thanks for including me in the panel. I think I'm providing some of that view from the outside industry perspective, but funny enough, I actually spent much more time in government, about 20 years. My stake in the OIB goes way, way back, which is back, I was on the House Armed Services Committee as a professional staff member on the Readiness Subcommittee, and one inside my portfolio were a lot of the Army and Marine Corps industrial facilities. So that was my original stake. And then I spent many years on the Army G4 staff as a civil servant. Fun fact, Chris Lohman and I were GS-15s together, and he always let me cheat off his paper. And then I moved more into other areas, moved into acquisition specifically, and spent time both, again, on the HASC as a PSM doing acquisition reform, and then in ASALT later as the DASA for strategy and acquisition reform before moving into OSD. And at that time, that was about the 2019, 2018 timeframe. That was a time that we had put out, worked with alongside AMC,
G4 and ASALT to put out an advanced manufacturing policy. So sort of early days of trying to infuse some of these elements into Industry 4.0 elements into the organic industrial base. So I'm glad to see it thriving and blooming. These days, I am in the private sector. I have a strategic advisory services firm, and I help companies navigate things, but I also get to, fortunately, and have quite a lot of fun advising informally and formally the Army on a variety of topics. I sit on the Army Science Board. We recently did a study on the munitions industrial base and surge capacity there. It's pretty fun. Hopefully we can talk about it, check it out. And then, and also I sit on the board of directors of MXD, which is one of the manufacturing innovation institutes. And hopefully we can talk a little bit about how MIIs can team up with the organic industrial base and help out, because I think that is part of our panel talk today about how to fuse the DIB and the OIB. So over to you guys.
Apologies. There we go. You can tell it'll be a lively conversation amongst us. So we're looking forward to it today. All right. So like I said, what we're really talking about here is thinking through how the Army can and should be partnering with industry to really lay bare some of the capability gaps that we see today and really get into how can we address those proactively to truly help with the modernization of the OIB. So with that said, where I wanted to start is highlight on something that you said, Rich, in the sense that we have to operate in this duality today of where we both have to sustain and maintain our legacy programs and the assets that are out in the field, but we also have to really be thinking about that next wave of innovation and modernization for new assets that we want to deploy and or completely retrofit to be able to serve to the new mission as it continues to evolve. So given that, again, Rich, I'd love to start with you in terms of how can industry understand that demand signal of what we're really asking for across those different planes? And what does that mean to really think through the exchange that you might need to have with your industry partners?
That was not one of the canned questions. I'm sitting here looking for my notes. I'm like, Dan Bedetti's about to get fired right about now. Actually, interestingly enough, so, the part about what can we do to communicate demands, as we, within my directorate and our relationship with the Defense Logistics Agency and the 4 lifecycle management commands and our industry partners, we often hear from industry. In fact, I was talking to one of our partners that I've known for quite a long time since I was a baby lieutenant, and he used to scuff me up a lot. We need to see your demand signal. We need a better demand signal. And I personally struggle with that, because the idea of being able to prognosticate that much further in the future, regardless of data. We can have all the data in the world and it can tell us what, when, a lot of that stuff. And we're trying to prognosticate more and more in the future, but we're the Army. We don't get to choose necessarily. We don't know when, we don't know where, we don't know how, but we're going to be asked to fight. We're going to be asked to contribute to a conflict or a crisis somewhere in the world over long distances for a period of time that we think we're going to predict, and we will get it wrong every single time. And so in that case, what are we trying to do with industry? I think I want to be able to project as far in advance as we can, but then I want to be able to work with industry to recognize when we think we need it, why we think we need it. I need it. And that's one of the challenges with industry today, is the sense that we can see it coming. We actually may know we're going to need it. And then the reality is, and for a whole multitude of reasons, we don't have it. You heard General Mohan talk about the numbers of NINs and parts that are backlogged and delayed for a whole host of reasons. Some of because we're not necessarily the best customers and partners necessarily. We vacillate, change our minds. In other cases, the requirement, if you will, the demand that we projected wasn't necessarily financially suitable or sustainable for our industry partners who are looking for a financial business case. In other cases, it's because our supply resources are diminished and challenged and already contested. We heard that from Dr. Ramdas and how we are trying to onshore certain materials. So for a whole multitude of reasons, there are still a lot of parts that we don't have. And it's not the future weapon system. It's the stuff we've been flying and driving for 30 years. So we want to continue. And I think part of that is so the long answer, short question is the data that we have, we got to exchange it. And we've got to be able to figure out where we're making smarter and deliberate investments. In some cases, as Ronnie and I were bouncing back and forth before General Smith said y'all could hear us on the microphone. In some cases, we talk about business cases and we talk about efficiency and we talk about business models and just in time and all that other stuff. But we're the Army. And in some cases, we need to have a deliberate decision on inefficiency and being effective. We've traded off a lot of strategic depth in our supplies for several years for a whole host of reasons. And we've got to build that depth back. And it may not sell. It may not be a Class 9 part that comes off the shelf tomorrow. And that flies in the face of some of the OSD business models on how we're investing working capital fund. But right now, even if I knew it and I had a demand and I could project and I think I can fly it on a drone over there tomorrow, I still don't have a part. And I can't print my way out of that problem.
Can I top on? I like what you said about we traded off a lot of strategic depth in our supply, I think you said, right? Or we've also, I think, traded off a lot of strategic depth in our defense industrial base. And so I'm also glad to hear you talking about understanding that demand signals need to be consistent. And here's why. So I'm gonna use, if you'll indulge me for a second, I'm gonna use the case study from the Army Science Board's munitions study, because it really laid it out pretty well for us. So, and I think Ukraine and Israel and COVID before that, I think really helped us sort of wake up to the realization that we probably have been managing our industrial base a little bit differently, and we're getting outcomes that we didn't expect, right? So it's worth looking at. So about a year ago, the Army asked us, the Army Science Board, to take a look at how do you surge production in munitions industrial base when it's needed. Because remember what was happening at the time, right? In 2022, when Ukraine started and the decision was made to begin supplying them with a lot of assets, the call went out to industry, and I think some in the White House and in the upper levels of the DoD were a little surprised by the industry timelines that came back to them. And so what we found was industry didn't surge in 2022 for two reasons. Essentially, it didn't have surge capacity, just frankly did not have surge capacity, because what is surge capacity? It is excess beyond your production levels. You don't have it if you have streamlined it out. And number two, they couldn't justify expending capital to develop surge capacity without funded contracts. And that they've been burned too many times in the course of several decades. There comes the inconsistent demand, right? So the history that they'd experienced over many decades was the budget would go up and down, ebb and flow, because ammo was always prioritized much lower than many other things, and still is, right? So without that consistent demand signal for decades, what happens? They streamline, they optimize their production levels. So that essentially means that production gets streamlined out, and a lot of the lines would be shuttered, facilities close, tooling atrophies, workforce leaves. And it keeps going, right? Suppliers go out of business. You end up with many single sources of supply. When the time we were doing that study, Hudson Institute came out with a report that said there were 300 individual cases of single points of failure in the munitions supply chain. Who knows, it could be more. And then, of course, the emergence of foreign sources of supply, often adversarial sources, or often from places we don't want to be reliant on. But the real issue here is that trend is not limited to the munitions industrial base. I think that it's pretty widespread. It's kind of a tail across the entire defense industrial base. So we get what we get based on how we manage our buying patterns. And those patterns are not always, it's not always ideal. It is for a lot of circumstances, just as you said.
You have a great point there. And I think what Rich and I talked about also was where does the surge capacity or transition from competition to crisis to conflict? And that resides in the OIB, right? So 14,000 rounds a month to 42,000 rounds of 155 every single month. That was done in the organic industrial base with the facilities, the equipment, and the people that we had. And then our industry partners, our operating contractors, hiring additional second shift, third shift, add a Saturday, do maintenance on Sunday, and then rinse repeat starting Monday morning, right? So that has been an incredible part of it. And another way to think about that is the surge is one part. So how long does it take to ramp up that surge? If it's X, then the requirement between D-Day and X needs to be sitting in the magazine depth, right? So that's how you mitigate that requirement or that shortfall in terms of production capacity or capability, depending on which it is. And there's a way to mitigate those.
That was great. Thank you. And just it strikes me as we were talking back and forth of the sense of there is data, there is something to go on, there is a lot of information that you have both from past performance as well as ways that we project and assume that we will be going into the field. But that said, what do you see as the real future of leveraging that data, both data we have today or data that we need to create? And what is that future of connectivity in each of these fields as well?
All right, so that was a canned question. So I'm just gonna, that's right. I think we've heard that quite a bit this today on the different data. I mean, in many cases, we're swimming in data. It's not very clean data at times, right? So in some cases, we have to clean that data. But I also want to just kind of put it. Maybe I'm the Debbie Downer in the room or the Dexatrim for just a moment on the appetite suppressant, but we're just now kind of getting to the point this year on the two-way data flow between Army Material Command and DLA, right? So it's fascinating, and that's taken a really, really concerted effort from my team and General Simmerly's team to share that level of data that lets us see. Because when industry says we need to be able to see your demand signal, DLA says the same thing of us. And in many cases, we're expecting what we're sending to DLA to be that demand signal to industry. And then you also asked about the connectivity. As industry is making a new system or a new tool or a new part, right? In some cases, as Ronnie says, we've got to be the surge capacity, and as Alexis brought up. In many cases, what we've seen over the last 2 years is we can't necessarily surge. The organic industrial base, by statute, that's what it's for. And so if we got to the point where we had that data, that tech data, that qualified data source, well, we could do things while industry then figures out, is it in fact financially advantageous for them to retool a production line, to change what it is that they're making, and then ultimately make us surge to our capacity. So I think that connectivity of clean data and data tech data packages then leads into the OIB. And it's only a value is if the machinery that I have in the OIB, thus the part of the modernization plan, is capable, interoperable, if you will, to do something with that tech data similar to what industry is doing, right? I can get all the clean tech data I want, but if I don't have a machine that can do the same thing, we're now back to an engineering problem again. And so what our effort is within the organic industrial base modernization strategy is trying to buy more of trying to develop more of a federated approach of systems and machines that are interoperable, that are able to use the same data. And we don't want I mentioned gold plated. I don't want the Millennium Falcon in all of the iron depots, hard iron depots. But I can have a Millennium Falcon and I have a couple other trash heaps that are flying, through the parsecs, right? And I only need it to do one thing. When the main system goes down, I can still do the one thing, and I have redundant capabilities, but I don't have duplicative capabilities. We can't afford duplicative. But again, that's all about being able to share the data. It's all about having interoperability with industry, and so then that gets us back to the data. And that is, we have to start bridging that data literacy and trust amongst the Army and industry. You trust us to operate your weapon system because you trust us to go do the fighting. We trust you to produce a weapon system that is reliable and maintainable in combat. But we don't necessarily trust each other with the data to do both. And so that's the challenge. And that's, go back to what Honorable Lohman did while he's still in the building. And that is, we don't necessarily need to own the data. I don't want to own it. I can't sustain it anyway. But we can have access to it so we can do something with it as a surge capacity until you industry catch up. And so I'll pause there.
Any ads?
I think, so from the JMC perspective, I look at our data a little bit differently because, and we've heard a lot about earlier today about supply chains and getting down to the nitnoid detail. And Joint Munitions Command and our JPEO ANA partners have done fantastic in developing the industrial base assessment tool and being able to get down to nitnoid detail of sub-component suppliers' data. So if someone were to come to me today and say, can you make 200 more 500-pound bombs next year? Okay, well, the answer is yes, but, and then we go back to IBAT and we go 500-pound bomb. What are all the constituents? It requires X number of pounds of TNT. What else is affected by, and I don't know that that's the case, but work with me here. So the explosive, okay, so now that explosive is a constituent in this many other components, right? And we now have the capability, and we're working with OSD as they're building a very similar capability to broaden that perspective on more supply chains. And then we can go back and we can come back to senior decision makers on which is it, right? Do you need 10,000 more 60 millimeter mortars, or do we need more 500-pound bombs, or how do we make that mix? And then you manage the workforce, the workload, the hours, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, what you were just mentioning is really what I tend to refer to as the diamond in how we think about the supply chain. Oftentimes the same demand, whatever the demand signal is, it's still going to funnel down to the exact same small suppliers at the end of the chain, even if there's a proliferation of suppliers in the middle that are doing some of the sub-assemblies or whatever the case may be, and depending on the asset itself. So with that said, and just thinking about the supply chain, what are your specific concerns and how to best address that proliferation and really coming down to some of those most constrained players within that network?
So frankly, Rich and I have a different perspective on the supply chain. So I'm very comfortable with where we are today in knowing the supply chains, knowing where, and the JPEO does this fantastically, and they're working with DevCom and academia and all these other places to find other ways to do it, but we're setting priorities on those things in the supply chain that are challenged. So from my command position and my perspective, I'm very comfortable with that in terms of manufacturing munitions. Here's where I would ask industry to start thinking about from the JMC perspective. If you go to Radford, Holston, Scranton, although Scranton's getting a lot more automated today. If you go to most of our OIB sites, you'll see very metal, very mechanical, 50-year-old equipment that can still do the same thing today, maybe 70. They can do the same thing today that they did 50 years ago. And if it breaks, it's a switch, it's a relay. And at worst, I call up my brother, General Layler, hey, sir, can you guys make this gear? And we can make a metal part. Where I'm asking industry to think about is, what does that robot that you're putting into my plant in 2025? We've been using this equipment for 70 years, and eventually the National Capital Region is going to forget about the OIB, and we're going to go on to the next shiny problem. So that robot's probably not going to last 50 to 70 years. What does the next robot look like in 2035? What are the obsolescence of those components? Who owns the right or the information to build the circuit card and the LCD screens and all the sexy stuff that really makes it automated and removes people from danger areas? So I'm now allowing the process to work on our munitions supply chain and starting to look at our industrial production supply chains in terms of the buildings, the infrastructure of those things, all of the cyber components that we do to separate, and all of the robots and automation and everything that's making us more efficient and more safe. How do we maintain that, and how do we avoid the obsolescence of that supply chain? And then Rich, yeah.
Actually, I think Alexis turning the industry perspective on that would be better.
It's good to see you're thinking ahead to what would be the next generation of I think you called it robots, whatever you called it.
Whatever.
I love it. I love it. But I think that I'm happy to see that we're thinking towards how to digitalize what's happening inside the depots and the arsenals. It's going to be critically important because I think you said it. We have a once in a generation opportunity to invest in these things and modernize them. This does not come around all the time. And I think taking advantage of that window of opportunity means not just catching up with a lot of deferred facility things like roofs and HVACs, but really setting ourselves up for the future. I mean, if we do, God forbid, have some sort of conflict with the Pacific, and I think that we do come to need our organic capabilities for repair and for production, we're going to need a lot more than the machines from, the 1950s. And so we've got to stop looking at things from quantity, like adding shifts and hours and hands, and more about investing in the digitalization and the digital transformation of even the workflows, all the way to, right from the base bones of it, we're going to need the proper industrial control networks that actually can, connect and then adjust when we need, to be building different things. So I'm glad to hear that you're thinking through that. Yeah.
And I think as we modernize too, and we do this investment, we're making some smart decisions about mass producing, right? So small cow, medium cow, those things that they fly off the assembly line 1 million a day, right? We're contracted to get up to 1.2 billion rounds in a year. So those things have to be very, very purposely built. Where we invest otherwise in production, now we have to start thinking about flexible capacity and flexible capability. Right. So can we, McAllister's multi-purpose load facility is absolutely a fantastic example of that. They can make, in one building, they can make everything from a 200-pound bomb up to the massive ordnance penetrator. And we have to be thinking about those. The flexible manufacturing artillery line that the JPEO is investing in, that's going to be a game changer. If you can have one line and change the tooling and dying and go from mortars to 155, it's incredible. That's where we have to start looking at the industrial base.
Yeah, and especially, so even beyond munitions, take a look at regular stuff, vehicles, gear, whatever. If you're thinking about manufacturing from a standpoint of advanced manufacturing can help you with speed and throughput, but it also has that flexibility because it not only could we, produce more things, but we could also shift what we're producing to stay ahead of when we innovate and to keep ahead of the enemy. We would need to adjust quickly, right?
Yeah, I love that. And I want to pull on that thread a bit more. Bad at that game. Okay, thanks. I do want to pull on that thread a little bit further, Alexis, because you mentioned the word flexibility, and that's so critically important when we think about the future requirements that are yet to be defined, right? And what we need to go do to really think about that future capability readiness in addition to the modernization tactics that we need. So with that, and really thinking about some of the advanced manufacturing techniques and other ways to infuse modernization and digitization into our spaces, how do we best kind of think about how the OIB and AMC specifically can leverage those Industry 4.0 capabilities to start to prep for those future requirements with the flexibility that they need?
So I think there's a lot of ways. The thing I'm most familiar with is the Manufacturing Innovation Institutes. And if you're not familiar with the MIIs, they're essentially, they're nonprofits, they're public-private partnerships. DoD sponsors many of them, other departments and agencies do as well. But there's 9 that are focused, DoD focused. They all specialize in some form of advanced manufacturing, whatever the thing is that they specialize in. I sit on the board of MXD, which is digital manufacturing and cybersecurity. So think like digital baseline and integrated digital environments and the basis of digitalization of all of the manufacturing processes. But essentially MIIs they're chartered to provide an ecosystem of all of the relevant parties from academia to government to industry, small all the way up to large, which can be pretty useful for trying to promote and adopt technology into that industrial base. They also work to upskill workforce, and they have a great convening authority. But the benefit to us is because they're DoD sponsored, they have to have an impact for the warfighter. And so I know that, they're trying to come in and provide assistance and help to the OIB, not just in the Army, but in the Navy and the Air Force as well. And so it's kind of a unbiased nonprofit connector advisor, to put it in simple terms, I think.
Rich, I'd love for you to chime in on that too, though. How do you best leverage some of those capabilities that she was just mentioning?
I think one of the things we've got to do, in some cases, we've come to recognize, quite frankly, the Army. Here's a newsflash: we're not great manufacturers, right? We don't. That's not what we do. That's not our core competency. So in some cases, we have to ask for the right help. And to Alexis's point, not only MXD, but some of the other MIIs, we've done some work with. I think one of the things that we can do by way of the modernization plan is continue to expand that. I mean, from MXD specifically, they've been great partners on a couple of different efforts for us. But where the other ones can help us, as she described, the non-biased, they're chartered as a public-private partnership with the OSD is to be non-biased, right? So they're not going to point us to a specific company or brand necessarily. They're going to provide us with options in best of breed to do a thing. So when we look at it, what we're trying to figure out and what we want to be able to figure out is we don't want to buy 23 solutions to a similar problem. If you're not familiar, the organic industrial base for the Army, it's 23 different facilities, 22 if you remove one that we're trying to get back to the Tennessee National Guard. But we don't want that, there are storage retrieval system requirements in most, if not all of those facilities. We don't want 23 different solutions to that material retrieval storage system capability. Where advanced robotics arm could help us is figure some of that out. Where we can remove a human from the chroming plating process instead of using big, thick rubber gloves, Tyvek suits, and respirators to manually dip metal parts into chemicals, which we still do, to then create an automated system or process to help us figure that out more safely, to remove humans from some of the energetics production in some of Ronnie's facilities. When you literally have humans smelling chemicals to determine whether that batch is good. Let's fix that, right? That would be a great idea. But then we also workforce development, because when you have the narrative that says we're trying to modernize and automate, right? When we talk about robotics, that's cool, sexy, advanced manufacturing. Everybody gets behind that. But when we talk about automation, people freak out because they think they're going to lose jobs. And that's not the case, because the reality is we need more people than we currently have. And so the workforce development, the upskilling, reskilling, in some cases, if I don't have a human dipping metals into chemicals, I need a human to maintain that really complicated machine. And we can teach that individual how to do that differently. And now that person's a far more competitive individual. And that's where some of those things to leverage some of these industry capabilities. And then the last thing is where the MIs and other industry partners can help us is the what to buy, right? So as I mentioned, she can help us understand best of breed in certain cases. But when it comes to the manufacturability, maintainability, sustainability of a weapon system, then having some industry and help us understand what to invest in, so we're buying the right things as taxpayers. I mean, we all probably get upset when we recognize we spent, billions of dollars behind something that we ultimately, turns into the Peloton from Christmas, and it's holding our laundry instead of being an exercise machine. So
I try to use my Peloton for more than that. I got the
see if
most
it's after lunch. I just want to make sure everybody's still awake. So
Well, since we brought in the human element, though, I think that's really important to discuss and to talk about a little bit about here. It hurts my heart as an Industry 4.0 person to hear about the variability of dipping a metal and not necessarily having the quality controls around that, or at least the consistency to be able to have it be more than eyeballed. But nonetheless, when we think about modernization across our facilities, it really is designed to help not only our production capability, but the worker themselves and the ways that they can really start to train themselves on the next generation of how we're going to do business, similar to what the industry is already doing, and in some cases is far ahead on. So, General Anderson, I'd love to get your perspective on how this topic specifically relates to helping our teams and helping the human element of those that sit at the factories.
Yeah, in my opinion, the most important thing that we're going to do at JMC is when we automate a process through process system management, or I'm sorry, through process safety management, as we look at the process and we try to design out as many risks as possible. So today, across most of my sites, we have human beings in a room with energetic material. So every opportunity that we have to remove human beings from that room, handling, touching, filling, or dealing with either energetic materials or the end product that becomes an energetic product, we want to remove that human from them or from the process. So there is a lot of automation coming on board now where our artisans are in a control room outside a blast wall in a safe space that are watching the processes happen, making sure that it's always in control, cameras watching every piece of it, as well as making sure that we're taking the right measures to make sure our processes are in statistical control. So that's one piece of it. And the example that I was going to give is the Tyvek suit, full respirator, in a room that has to be around 200 degrees to make sure that the TNT and the metal shell don't come down to an unacceptable temperature where you start to get a separation. And that human being in Iowa, and you have the added corn humidity, that's a real thing, by the way, that removing that person from those miserable conditions and the safety aspect, I think all of those are going to help. We have ACMI is helping. You know, they're going to build a campus right outside of Crane. We have four-year institutions. We have technical colleges. We have high schools that are partnering with my commanders across the country, talking about how are you going to modernize? What are the requirements for your future workforce? And academia has been instrumental in helping us identify those requirements. And we've worked very closely with AMC G1 and Ms. Miranda, and before her, Ms. Wicker, in the OIB Human Capital Modernization Implementation Program as well. So that has to go along side by side with the infrastructure and machining modernization as well.
I was just going to chime on one thing about the human capital, and I jest that it's just the way I cope, I suppose. But the human capital dynamic of our OIB modernization and ultimately the OIB, the industrial base in and of itself, I won't joke about, because it's incredibly, it's amazing if you get a chance to walk around. It's very generational in some cases. It's recognition that these artisans, these individuals could in many cases go do something way more cool, if that's a word, in a much more modern, much more capable facility, but they don't, because they are as red-blooded as they come. And then the reality is that's ultimately, even if the machinery is not great, the robots are not great, it's not a great work environment in some cases, the intangible is the ability for someone who's been doing this a long time. As General Mohan's picture showed, that big old fella from Alabama. I'm on the War Eagle side of it, right, from my daughter. But that big old fella who can run that torque wrench we, the organic industrial base, truly, as we think about the expeditionary capacity, can't do it without that person. That experience base that those individuals have, you can't put a price on it, and you dang sure can't replicate it. So the one thing we do want to make sure of that with our modernization efforts, with the workloading conversations, with the weapon systems that we're sustaining, is that we continue to invest in those individuals, because arguably when they leave, they won't come back, and we can't regain that experience. So I'll just pause.
Yeah, I'm just going to add a little bit to this, which is I think what I've noticed a lot, especially being in the private sector, is that there's, with the newer generations, there's a growth of interest in a lot of the digital tools and the more advanced technologies. And I think that, we have a workforce that is on average older than maybe its cohorts or peers. And so this could be an opportunity, again, another element to advanced manufacturing. And I think it echoes what you were saying before, is that it could be an opportunity to peak interest and recruit the next generation of artisans. And so that will, be something to be looking at as well. Can I shift into, you had asked a question about how industry and OIB connect, and we talked a lot about production, especially munitions. I think another thing that I don't want to lose sight of is how much that connection is made in the repair on platforms. So we've talked a lot about digitalization, and what I think is an important piece here is that, the department's really excited about digital transformation, and it focuses a lot on digital engineering. There's a great interest in born digital, XM30, FLARA, all of these systems are pathfinders for being born digital. And there's great advantage in that. I think that we need to also put some attention on repair digital. And we just came up with that term. So if anybody wants, all of a sudden it just came to me.
Write it down.
It's not a very good one. But anyhow, with an integrated digital environment, so here's the connection between industry and the OIB. If theoretically these things that are designed digitally, there's a lot of advantage to that. They should also be manufactured with advanced manufacturing at the OEMs. But when they get to the depots, they should be still relying on that data that's in that digital baseline and supported from the information that's coming through that stream. And so I want to make sure that in this once in a lifetime generation of funding that we have the opportunity and that we truly upgrade the OIBs so that they're able to receive these systems in a few years that were born digital. So I think that, so my big appeal is that we make sure that we get an integrated digital environment. We have the capability to do that, working with the primes back and forth, sharing that data back and forth and all that.
And I think, to your point, picking it up at any point in its lifespan, being able to deconstruct it, still find its digital signature or its data signature to the extent it exists, and being able to maximize on that baseline matters, right? And it takes different muscle depending on production or aftermarket, but it's some of the same underlying themes. And so how to address that. To that point, maybe the flip side of that conversation of how do you best leverage and kind of tear down or be able to understand that data and break down some of the barriers that exist today. There's lots of friction in the system. There's a lot of bureaucracy in the system. Especially on a legacy platform, it's hard to be able to get the data rights, to be able to understand what you're going to go look at. What are some of your maybe starting inclinations or starting recommendations around how to break down or revise some of the policy in that space to allow us to do that more effectively and efficiently?
I think there's a couple of different things come to mind. My mind's working faster than my mouth right now. I'm trying to think of the best way to frame it. So first of all, we were just talking about integrated digital environments. And if we have an environment and multiple different parties are connected to it and can deposit data, technical data, we're talking about intellectual property now. Everybody get excited because it's super exciting stuff. Well, mostly it gets exciting because everybody gets pissed off about it. So if you have information on one side, the provider, the OEM, and you have information and you need to see the information on the other side, the receiver, the depot, there is, I believe, ways to do this with a variety of new concepts like tech data as a service has been floated around, which is kind of like you want to go old school, iTunes model, where you're sort of paying for the subscription or the right to use it. I think we can figure this out. I think we make it harder than it has to be. And we don't even need, guess what? We don't even need acquisition reform for that. There's a lot of flexibility that's already provided because the statute requires that, a preference for specially negotiated licenses. What are specially negotiated licenses? That's like, a contract that you develop based on the needs of the case and each party's interests. So that basically provides flexibility to try new models or to have different things, which is kind of how business works. Business to business, it's all contractual relationships. So I think we have opportunity to do this a little bit differently with better outcomes.
You said policy and integrating our industry partners. Can I take a different approach? So, ma'am, I will, when this is over, I'll come over and get my counseling statement. JMC fails our safety inspection every year because I don't have an amnesty box at an industrial site. I'm okay with that. I'm just going to accept that risk. No one that's producing IMX or TNT or nitrocellulose should be having that in their pocket. There's no amnesty. There's no need for it. So where, that is a policy that I can accept, make a deliberate decision to accept risk on. How do we better integrate the DIB and our commercial partners into the OIB? So GoCos, right? We have our operating contractors, public-private partnerships. We have lots of opportunities there. SIG is back here. We've got books that'll show you all 17 locations, the thousands and thousands of acres, 19,000 buildings, additional capacity for electricity, railway, road networks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when I go to our industry partners, and I did this in October, come work with us in the OIB as a GoCo or a P3. And I am told that it's too bureaucratic, it takes too long, your policies drive up the costs, and it's too expensive for us to do business with. Okay, I'll accept the premise just for the purpose of a conversation. So in October, I asked our industry partners, come back and tell me what policies make it too expensive, where the bureaucracy lies, and I will commit to go back to the building and either get a deviation or a change in policy, or I will make a deliberate decision to accept risk on some of these things, right? So I'm willing to work with our industry partners. I think Army Materiel Command is. I know the building is. The chief is dead set on doing things differently so that we can go faster and be more effective, and by accepting prudent risk. But to date, I've had 0 takers, right? So we do have to do things differently. We have to dig into the minutia of dumb policies and change it. We either change it or we just say we're not going to do it. There's only 2 red lines. I'm not going to break a law, and I'm not going to break audit. Everything else is fair game, right? We have a policy when we build the next gen squad weapon that we had to paint the ceiling, added $1 million to construction. Why? Because it was just some arcane requirement. Well, let's just accept the risk. We're not going to do that. Save the taxpayers $1 million, right? So those are the kinds of feedback that industry could really give us. Hey, we don't do it that way. We do it this way, this way, this way, and this is how it's more affordable and more efficient and more effective for the Soldier, Sailor, Airman, Space Force that are out there, doing bidding on our behalf. Let's be more effective about it, and let's find the policies that we can work around, change, or break to be more effective and integrated. Different approach.
I love it though. I mean, hearing that statement is just huge in terms of being able to do business faster. Yes. And even the business of war, the business of the military, we've got to be able to accelerate those interactions. I know we only have a few seconds left and you got us started here on this, but to the rest of the audience or to the rest of the panel, just real quick, what is one thing that you would like to ask industry to make OIB more effective in helping the modernization journey? Rapid fire.
Can I actually I'm going to flip that around. I'm going to play industry. I'm going to ask Army.
Okay.
I think probably one thing, okay. Off the top of my head, I think it'd probably be very useful to understand how the OIB is modernizing, specifically where the priorities are, so that, not in general, but specifically where the priorities are, so that industry can understand where to plug in and what to offer. Sometimes it can be confusing knowing where the needs are and getting connected to the right people.
My feedback is where you have supply-based challenges to produce the materials that we need to fight, inclusive of the depth of supplies that we have, either communicate with us early so we can help mitigate the risk, come be a help us come to our OIB facilities. If you have a production capacity challenge, come to us and we'll see if we can help do it by way of public-private partnerships. Otherwise, share us the access to the data, or we're going to reverse engineer it. We're going to make it ourselves.
Final words.
All right, how about a round of
Thank you to the
applause for
team.
this fantastic panel?
Well done.